Hello and welcome everyone. Today we are going to dive into the world of containerization, specifically focusing on how to containerize SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server for use with asp.net core application. We'll be using Docker, Docker-compose and init scripts to create a robust, repeatable database setup. And also, have you ever wondered, the containers are ephemeral or they are created and then destroyed. Then how am I going to persist the database with some records, with a table and some records? So there lies the answer, that is the Docker volume. So we'll be using Docker volume for data persistence. So here, this is the overview. Project requirements, file structure, create init.sql scripts to set up database, create a Dockerfile, set up docker-compose file, run and test container, verify data persistence. So let us start with project requirements. We'll build this project from start and we'll build till the end. I'll run through all the steps and the project will be on the GitHub source code. So you'll be up for a very enjoyable time. Sit through the entire session to get the best out of this. Okay, so let's see what are the project requirements. So for this project, we are assuming that you have an existing asp.net core application that needs a SQL Server database. You will need to have Docker and Docker-compose installed on your machine. When I mean Docker, that is either Docker desktop for Windows or Docker desktop for Mac, depending upon the system you are using. It's also helpful to have a basic understanding of SQL and Docker concepts. Don't worry, if you are not an expert, we'll walk through everything step by step. Okay. Now let's talk about the file structure. Alright. So I will first create the project. So let's flip over to Visual Studio. And recent project templates, asp.net core web API. I will click on next and I will make it a name that is suggestive of what we are going to do. Let's give it a name, Dockerize SQL with data. And beware that you should never check this. Place solution and project in the same directory. Okay, so let it be unticked and then click on next. And .NET 8 long-term support, authentication done. Enable container support. We'll do it, but we'll do it manually. Okay, for the moment, we'll check it out. Okay, and the rest of the other we'll keep at default and then click create. So we'll create the Docker file and we'll create the Docker-compose file or manually for us to understand everything. Now for the time being, I will postpone the file structure discussion to sometime in the next few minutes because I'll need to create the necessary files before talking about the file structure. So first of all, we'll create on this project root. This is the project root. If you look into the solution into the Windows Explorer, this will look like. So this is the project structure as it looks on the Windows Explorer or File Explorer. So I've got Dockerize SQL with data. Within that, there is another folder, Dockerize SQL with data. So if you go one level up, the solution is created at the root level. If you consider this as the root level. Okay. So even the solution file is also under this folder Dockerize SQL with data, but it's on the top level, on the root level, and this is the project root. Project root has got the csproj file where we'll create the Docker file, init.sql file, and the Docker-compose file. So let's switch back to the action once again. So now we'll create an init.sql. to initialize the script and create the database. So how am I going to do it? What I will do, I will click on Tools and I will click on SQL Server, New Query, and I will close it. Connection, I will do it for later, and I will cancel it for the time being, and I will just paste the code that I have got on my clipboard. So you can see it needs to be saved somewhere. So what I will do is I will save it at, I will explain once I have saved it into the proper place. So this is Docker SQL with data. So I will need to save it here. So if you save it as SQL file, it will show only, there's nothing. So it will not show any other file. But if you click on all file, you can see easily that you can see all there is a CS project file, and there are some app settings and other files. So I will save it as init.sql. So it will automatically take the extension and it will be saving over here. So you can see this is a simple script which creates the database my app and use that database, and it creates a product table with an ID column and a name and price column, and insert into product three simple entries, 3 records. So once this product table, the product my app database is created, we can verify everything, which we are going to do. Okay. So next we will create the Dockerfile SQL Server. Now remember, I intentionally didn't look for automatic Docker support in the beginning because I wanted to handcraft the Dockerfile and also the Docker-compose file, because in case I had used the template from the Visual Studio .NET environment, I had to anyway completely change the Dockerfile structure, Dockerfile contents rather. So I will create a Dockerfile SQL Server. So how do I create? Add, new item, and I will just look for a text file. This plain text file can take any shape. I will name it Dockerfile SQL Server. I click on add. It's added. You can see Dockerfile SQL Server. So this is a text file. So I shouldn't specify any extension. So I will recreate it. Dockerfile -SQL Server, and this time it will Dockerfile SQL Server.txt. It keeps on creating this text file which I don't want, so I will take help of the I will delete what I will do, add Docker support. So let it create a Docker support with the target OS as Linux and container build type Dockerfile. I could go for .NET SDK, but that will be out of the scope, and it will be for an upcoming video how you can keep the container build type as .NET SDK. So can click on OK. So Dockerfile is created for me. Now I need to change this Dockerfile and rename this as, basically, why do I need to rename? Because I need to give it a explanatory name so that it is clear what this is intended for. Dockerfile under hyphen SQL SQL Server. Okay, I can rename it like that. No issues. All right. And now for this Dockerfile SQL Server, I will remove everything and paste from my clipboard. This is my Dockerfile SQL Server. Now let's break this down. Here on this first line, we are using the official SQL Server 2019 image as our base, latest image. Okay, and we are setting the environment variables to accept the end user license agreement. So EULA, end user license agreement, equals yes. Okay, and is the administrative password SA password your strong @ password. So you can just change it to any password you like, but you create it as a strong password. So it requires you to have uppercase character, lowercase character, and numbers and special characters. So at least 3 combinations. So here you can see the lowercase and uppercase character, the special characters, and a numeral. This is O, password O. Okay. Now we copy the init.sql, which is here, to this, the container. This is the container entry point. And this run command starts the SQL Server, then waits for it to be ready, executes our init script, and then stops the server. Okay, so with this message, service broker manager has started, and then it takes the administrative username SA and our password, and it writes to the Docker entry point initdb, init.sql script, and then finally stops the server. The Dockerfile ensures our database is set up correctly when the container is built. Now, before proceeding further, let's review our slideshow where we are. So we have already seen the file structure. Actually, if the file structure is still not complete, we'll need to create the Docker Compose. Then it will be complete. I will show it later on. Then already we have created the init.sql script to initialize the database, create the database, form a table, and then insert some records. And we have also seen the Dockerfile SQL Server, and we have seen an explanation of step-by-step explanation for each of the line. And then we'll set up the docker-compose.yml. So let's switch over again back to our field. Here at the project root, I will add a new item. So this time I will create docker-compose.yml file. YAML or YML extension, both are the same. So docker-compose.yml, which is a YAML file, and I will add this code and I will explain step by step. Okay, so docker-compose.yml file is added to the project root, as well as init.sql and Dockerfile. Now, what does this YAML file does? So it defines a service called DB, now which uses our Dockerfile. So I have named the Dockerfile as Dockerfile SQL Server. That's why the Dockerfile is Dockerfile SQL Server, which is of the same directory where the Docker Compose file is. Okay, so if you have not changed the name of Dockerfile and kept the Dockerfile name as Dockerfile, then you would have to make it just Dockerfile rather than Dockerfile SQL Server. You would insist with just the Dockerfile. Dockerfile is Dockerfile. And ports, this is the host port. 1433 is the port on the host computer, and this is the container port. And this is the volume that we are using. SQL data /var /ops /msql. Environment, we have got SA password and then accept end user license agreement. All right. So it maps the port 1433 from container to our host machine. This is the host machine, as I just said, and this is the container port. And it sets up the volume for the data persistence, and it passes our environment variables. Now let's run the container. So for running the container, I'll click on Tools, and I will developer command prompt or developer PowerShell, one and the same thing in this case, and then I'll have to cd it, change the directory to Docker That's because all the magic lies on this folder. This is the project root folder, and then we'll get this build command, docker compose up and build at the same time. Okay, we'll explain in a bit what this command does, but let's see if everything is fine. It will succeed, and then we're ready for more action for testing. It's still building. Wow! So okay, it doesn't matter. It will be showing as in this condition. So it is still running. The container is running because you can see, if you just study it quickly. So the network is created, volume also created, and container with this name, Dockerized SQL data with data -db-1 is created. So SQL Server 2019 will run as non-root by default. Container is running as user MS SQL. So everything looks fine because I don't see any error, which I don't expect also. Now, what we will do is the testing part, final part. The thing is, we'll have to create the server. So for that, we'll expand the SQL Server Object Explorer. So you can see the local host, it was created from an earlier project. If you just delete it, if you disconnect, I can show you it's reconnected by creating another add SQL Server, and I'll give server name as local host because we are using the server port or host port 1433, and this is certainly SQL Server authentication and SA, and what is the password? That is the your strong password, whatever password you have selected. You can always differ with me. Remember, password or it doesn't matter, and mandatory true and trust service ideally it should be true. Let us see what shows in the default. Okay, my app. Yes, and connect. Wow, awesome. So you can see in the databases, my app database is already there. Okay, with tables dbo.product. So if you look into the data, it already has this 3 data. Okay, so what we can do, we'll query the products table to see the initial data, and then we have already seen that, and we'll insert a new product. Okay, so I've created this SQL query on db.products.data, and then I will run this. One row affected. What I will do, I will have to stop the container. Okay, first stop the container and then start it again. Okay, for this change to take effect. All right, so tools again and command line. Rather, our PowerShell was running here in this position. So what we'll do is, or I can keep it as it is. Take a fresh this thing, developer command prompt or developer PowerShell again, and then cd Dockerized SQL with data, and then give this command docker-compose down, okay, to stop the running containers. Not this. This is the products insert product script, so I'll have to change to It is on my clipboard, unfortunately. So docker compose down. So it is a container removed and network also removed. Volume is still there, and then I will give it a docker compose up command. Again, the container and the networks are created. Okay, so if everything is working fine, there is no error which I can't find. So a quick check, and let's see the SQL Server. We have, please remember, we have got a product for inserted. So SQL Server Object Explorer, and then refresh the database. It's still there. Database is my app and tables. You can see the database. Table view data is still not there. Okay. Oh, yeah. Product for 25.99. So that was the inserted record. All right. So I have shown you all the 4 data. First 3 were inserted when it was seeded initially, and then the last record was inserted when the database was already created. Okay. So we have done this. We have run the container. We have tested the container by creating the connection, and we have seen the data persistence. All right. So if we want to connect this database from our asp.net core web API application or asp.net core any other application that you have created, you may not need to create web API. You can go for asp.net core MVC application or Razor Pages application, and you can still use this entire approach without fail. So if you need to connect this database from your asp.net core application, you will need to update your connection string in the app-setting.json file. Okay, so here you can paste your code app-settings.json file. So where it is launch settings.json, dependencies, app-settings.json file. So app-settings.json.development. Now you can add this connection string. After this login, connection strings, server localhost 1433, database my app, user SA, password this, test server certificate true. Now what are the benefits? What are the benefits of this approach? Now this approach has got the benefits like it provides an isolated environment for your database. It's easy to set up and tear down, and great for development and testing, and it ensures a consistent experience across different development machine. But there are some considerations also. So you have to use your resource usage, especially if running multiple containers. And for production, you want to use more secure practices like not using the SA account, and make sure to manage your volumes carefully to avoid data loss. Now, finally, I would like to show you that, here, this is still running. You can see the containers, and you can also see the volumes. Dockerize SQL with data underscore SQL data. So because you can see Docker compose SQL data. Okay, so you can see everything running visually also on Docker desktop for Windows. And from here also you can easily delete this volume, and you can see all the images that has been created. This is the latest in use, Dockerize SQL with data DB, and these are the containers. Okay, so this is the container. I can also stop this container and delete it, or I can stop it and restart it, pause it, stop it, and then delete it. So all this thing can be done on Docker desktop visually without going for even the command to stop the Docker container or remove the Docker container. So we have successfully containerized the SQL Server with pre-configured database for our ASP.NET Core application. We have set it up to initialize the database on startup and persistent data between container restarts. Now, this setup can significantly streamline your development process and make it easier to onboard new team members.